I'm Jamel Hill, and on the latest His and Hers podcast, Michael Smith and I discuss an apocalyptic event that is coming up, and no, it has nothing to do with the fact that the Cubs just won the World Series. Take a listen right now.
You're listening to the First and Last podcast with Robin Lundberg and Mike Golic Jr.
Happy Monday, Mike.
Back and better than ever, Robin. Jesus, we are a bunch of cornballs right now.
Hey, already? That's it? That's all it took?
That's all it took. That little bit was all I needed. But good morning, Robin. How are you this week?
I am well. We've fallen into the realm of cornball territory already. Anyway, I'll do a callback to Friday. You were doing Le Batard show on Friday, and I was doing this show. And I talked about storylines and the impact storylines can have in the entertainment business, period. I mean, I think we see it in political, quote-unquote, coverage or whatever, news media, however you want to put it. And we talked about the ratings for the World Series and how big they were, and, of course, the storylines of the Cubs doing what they did. And then in the NBA, there's a lot of storylines. It was fresh off of Westbrook and Durant, right? That's one right there. And something I had noticed this year is that the NFL storylines weren't as ripe per se. And I don't know if that's a symptom or one of the root causes for all the doom and gloom ratings talk. But after last night, I'm wondering, are the Raiders going to be one of those stories? Because we've had the Cowboys emerge and the whole Dak Prescott deal. I think that's been the biggest story of the NFL season thus far outside of protests. Would the Raiders qualify? Are they coming up as another big storyline that can help the NFL as we move from midseason toward the playoffs?
I think so, and really you could storyline to me in this instance. I understand for us it's the narratives we can assign and the players that are involved, and they've got a good young quarterback in Derek Carr that's finally making that leap. That's easy for us to latch onto, but storyline in the NFL to me translates to team we can count on to be good week in and week out. And right now that's the Cowboys, that's the Patriots, and that's the Raiders for the most part. And there's other teams sprinkled in there, but those seem to be the teams that from the outside looking in, we're all comfortable collectively buying in on at this point as a product that we can count on each and every week. So the Raiders definitely qualify in that. The way this team is made up right now, to me, looks like a team that's going to have success and be able to play winning football more often than not at this point.
Of course, the Raiders beating the Broncos last night 30-20, but I think it goes beyond that. I mean, you're right that helps drive as far as knowing this team is going to be entertaining or knowing this team is going to be relevant when it comes to the end of the season. But for the Raiders, I don't know if it's even Cubs-esque in the same sense. Like with the Cubs, there was this big drought for the World Series. I mean, actually, hilarious. I was watching something last night, or no, was it Saturday Night Live and the Cubs were on it? And my wife commented, and she said, I heard about this. It's something, it'd been a long time since they won or something like that. And I was like, my goodness.
There's a segment built in right there, just seeing sports through the prism of your wife right there and what she sees and doesn't see. That would be entertaining enough for me.
Wifey analysis is
Yes.
what it's called. But the Cubs, it was the World Series drought and how dedicated their fan base is. The Raiders have screamed dysfunction. Like, their brand, to me, has been dysfunction over the years, or some version of that, where it's like, the Raiders aren't going to be good. Come on, they're totally mismanaged, they're terrible, and all that sort of stuff. So beyond them just being consistently good and entertaining, because they do have entertaining players like Carr and Amari Cooper and Latavius Murray, but beyond that, it's the Raiders doing it. And that is a story to me because it's the Raiders.
It is, and with this team, too, you've got some of the off-the-field storylines of the possible move to Las Vegas that we keep hearing in the background. So there's that dynamic with the fans right now, too, where they're kind of walking on eggshells, not sure what the future of their team in Oakland is going to be. But listen, they are. They're a very entertaining team. It's an unlikely source. I'll be interested to see what that translates into, because the Cubs, to me, is sort of it's such an outlier, because that's your typical storyline on steroids there in Major League Baseball this year. That was the perfect storm and one of the biggest markets that we've got for that, and that team was the best in the league all year, so we got to sort of follow them along all through this. I'd be interested to see, and that's really my question for a lot of this year, because I feel like some of the problem this year has been teams that were usually accustomed to being good and players that were accustomed to being at the top level of this haven't delivered so far, with the exception of a couple. So as we see sort of a shift in who's controlling the league here, I just wonder what the adjustment's like from the outside looking in, as all of a sudden the product that we're used to looks a lot different.
But the Raiders have always had a strong fan base. We all know about the guys painting their face or whatever they're called there. The NWA, hats being popularized back then by Ice Cube and those guys. And even now, there's a bar on 40th Street in Manhattan on 3rd Avenue, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I just notice it because I would walk by it. It was near where I used to live. And every time I would walk by it, I'd see the giant Raiders logo. And I would just think to myself, who's going every Sunday to watch the Raiders play? What are you doing to yourself? And now that that's flipped, I do think there's something to that because their fan base is passionate in that sense. And there is a bit of a heritage aspect to the Raiders.
Which is interesting, too, because you think about the heritage, in addition to the dysfunction that you mentioned, it was also the bad boy Raiders. That was what they've built that identity on out there in Oakland. And this team right now is anything but. When you look at this team, there really aren't those guys that you can point to and say, oh, yeah, that's a bad dude. I mean, listen, Khalil Mack's as good as there is in the NFL on defense. You mentioned the number of weapons they've got on offense in that team, but none of those guys, at least from the outside looking in for us, have been the huge personalities you can really latch onto. Amari Cooper, if you're looking at him as maybe the poster child for this Raiders team, about as mild-mannered a guy off the field that we get the perception of in public. So I think this team is a little different like that, but the quality of product they're putting out there is one that passionate fan base can latch onto. You're absolutely right.
Here's Jack Del Rio after last night's win.
I think the biggest thing is to find a way to get a win. I'm certainly very proud of our front. We've invested a lot in our front. We've committed to being a physical team, and that was a great opportunity to kind of illustrate that.
Well, nothing particularly newsworthy or noteworthy about what he just said there. He's done a good job for Oakland for sure.
He has, and maybe he's the most interesting guy about that team because we've sort of assigned that. I heard someone last night refer to Jack Del Rio as the riverboat gambler now this year in the NFL because of some of his decisions on fourth down and late in games and what he's done there. And he's your leather jacket wearing dad, all that stuff with Jack Del Rio. So certainly he's a pretty colorful personality in the NFL at this point. But you talk about as far as the makeup of that team, I saw this stat, and I'll use any instance that we can to talk about offensive line, and his sound there sort of gave me the window. But you asked last week what a statistic was to sort of measure that you can look to and say this is how well the offensive line is performing.
It was a caller, actually, yeah.
It was a caller, yeah, who asked that. And I said it was yards before contact is usually a pretty good predictor. And last night for the Raiders, I believe Latavius Murray had 79 rush yards before contact, which is more than his previous 4 games combined. So look no further than that as they drummed him up front. But the other thing you can look at with offensive line, more often than not, and this isn't an exact science, but follow the money. Follow the teams that are spending money on the group up front because of all the things we talk about with O-line trouble traditionally now in the NFL, whether it's being undercoached, the talent's not as good coming out of college, it's harder to keep guys together under the CBA. So when teams are locking guys down for a while with money, it means A, they've got guys they're confident enough in to do that, and B, they can keep that group together for longer than most get to in the NFL. And their offensive line in Oakland has the highest salary cap value of any team this season at $38 million. The guys, they went out and spent money on Colecchio Semele, their left guard. They've got Rodney Hudson, who's been one of the best and highest paid centers in the league for a while, Donald Penn and the rest of that group. They've got their flaws, but they've invested in that group up front, and it pays off. And you've seen that with teams, the other teams we're talking about in this, Dallas, New England taking a big step this year, not in, any small part because they brought their offensive line coach from years past back after a year of retirement. His name escapes me right now. I'm sure I'll get a text in a minute from somebody I know is listening who would have a little knowledge of that situation. But all of these groups, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who we thought coming into this season, now they've been banged up a little bit. They lost their starting center. I don't know for how long. It was a finger in the middle of this game, but that's another team. They've invested in their group up front and traditionally been pretty good because of it. So that's another place that you can look and see pretty clearly who's valuing that and who's not.
You're going to love this quote from Derek Carr.
They're the best. They're the best. They should all be in the Pro Bowl. I'm tired of hearing about other O-lines, man. Those guys are the best.
Here's the thing. What other O-lines is he hearing about? What you just said was the most I've heard about offensive lines all year. Like, what O-line, what show is Derek Carr turning on and somebody's like, the Vikings, their offensive line.
Yeah, no, listen, that to me seemed like a thinly veiled shot, maybe not so thinly veiled shot at the Cowboys right there, because the only offensive line that people talk about is the Cowboys' offensive line. It's got the most recognizable names. They're the best offensive line in the NFL. For me, that's not really up for debate. Now, the Raiders' offensive line very much working their way into that conversation. They're probably, the second. Thinking off the top of my head, I would be comfortable calling them the second best offensive line in the NFL. So I have no problem. Love the quarterback going out there and caping for the big boys. That's how you score points. I would venture a guess that Derek Carr shares a lot of meals and time outside of football with those guys. It seems like that kind of relationship.
You're listening to the First and Last Podcast with Robin Lundberg and Mike Golic Jr.
2nd down and 6 at the 26. He got 2 at the 28. Prescott deep out to the right. No one covered Witten at the 10, and he walks it in. Touchdown, Witten. He's a touchdown machine, I tell you.
First and last, Robin Lundberg, Mike Golic Jr., James Holdsworth tweeting in on the 1-800-Flowers Twitter feed about those Dallas Cowboys. They got a 36 Autumn Roses for $36 deal right now. Go to 1-800-Flowers.com/ESPN. Hurry offer ends Friday. The Cowboys offensive line, Robin, what planet have you been on? And I guess that's right. You had referenced it when Derek Carr was complaining about all these other offensive lines being talked about, and I guess that was, as the kids would say, a subliminal shot at the Cowboys offensive line. But I will say in my defense, it's not as if exactly people are nonstop talking about the Cowboys offensive line. It does get mentioned. It's like, oh, yeah, the Cowboys have a great offensive line that's helping Prescott. Ezekiel Elliott behind that Cowboys offensive line, that's going to be great. But it's not like extended analysis and nonstop talk about the Cowboys offensive line.
No, yeah, we've long since departed from that because the general public can only take so much direct offensive line analysis, and really that was 2 years ago when they got that current group that they've got together now. That was the most dissection of offensive line play I've seen in a national media platform, in my lifetime, I think. And it was refreshing and it was wonderful, but now we're relegated back to the dark ages of just sending film clips amongst former O-linemen and wallowing in the shadows, but it's some pretty sweaty, fat shadows.
Now, as far as the biggest storyline, I think, on the field of the NFL this year, maybe the Raiders is coming up, and we're asking you what the story is, or are there major storylines in this year's NFL season at 888-SAY-ESPN. But is that first one done? The Tony Romo, Dak Prescott thing. Without Prescott getting hurt, is there any way at all Tony Romo can come back in? I know we have this conversation every single week, but Dak Prescott was 21 of 27 for 247, 3 touchdowns yesterday, in addition to 20 yards rushing. His statistical profile is excellent. The Cowboys are 7-1. They've won 7 games in a row. He's got 12 touchdowns, just 2 picks on the season, a quarterback rating over 100, 67% completion rate. I mean, there's no chance they can take him out of that position at this point, can they?
Oh, yeah, there's still a very real chance they can take him out of that position.
That's crazy to me. Like, you can't be playing that well and be subbed out.
Nothing that I've said about this situation has changed because of what we've seen. It definitely hasn't changed because of a great performance against the Browns yesterday, but the Browns have sort of been your, if you're looking for offensive performance and someone to win you in your, suicide pool, look no further than whoever's playing the Browns that week. And that's not to discourage the Browns. That's a severely undermanned team right there who's dealt with way too many injuries this year and just talent-wise is deficient. But they go out there and compete. So I give a ton of credit to that Browns team. But for the Cowboys,
and they lose every game. They go there and compete, and then they lose every game. We make sure we put that in there.
Yeah. Listen, because again, they're criminally undermanned at this point because of a number of reasons. So that's just
12 quarterbacks deep. I think also.
Yeah, that never helps your cause. Dak's gone out there and played great, and you heard Jerry Jones talking about it. He's thrilled that for a rookie quarterback, he's been able to get him this many quality, meaningful reps in his first season. I think Jerry Jones said about this with Tony Romo. Tony had to wait 4 years to get this kind of experience in the NFL. So it's invaluable stuff going forward. But listen, what I've said before still holds true. If this guy gets healthy and you still think he gives you a better chance to win, this team's not going to implode. I think it was Dan Graziano who did an article I was just reading on .com, and I wasn't able to pull it up. So I'll double back to that and make sure I credit the right person, but I believe it was him, talking about the makeup of this team. And taking one guy out at that position is not going to derail this team. It's not going to derail why this team has been so great. Because this team is built the right way, and because Tony Romo's a darn good quarterback himself when he's healthy. So you've got to decide and keep measuring behind the scenes. Not only is this guy's back healed, we know it's been healed, but is he going to be healthy enough to go out there and do the things football-wise? And so they're able to wean him along in practice. None of that, from my angle, has changed. I believe that when he is fully healthy, if you believe that what he gives you on the field is better overall because he's a veteran and on his best day, one of the top 5 or 6 top probably 6 quarterbacks in the league on his best day, then you go with him and you don't look back. And there's really, in my eyes, no way to screw that up.
Well, but I don't see how you can think that at this point. And all due respect to Tony Romo, the guy's had an excellent career, of course, but I just don't know what you could be looking at to make you think you're going to be playing better under him than Dak Prescott. I mean, he's been throwing the ball. One of the criticisms of him was throwing the ball downfield. He's killing it throwing the ball downfield. Passing 15-plus yards downfield during their win streak, he's completing 68% of those passes. That's second to Tom Brady. Tom Brady is second to him during that span. That's first in the NFL. So where is the reason? What is the thing that you go, other than experience and knowing that Tony Romo is an excellent player, what tangibly do you look at and say, you know what, we need to improve there, or he can improve us there?
As I've said, this is stuff that only people in the building are going to know, because you mentioned that was one of the criticisms of Dak early on, is that they weren't pushing it downfield. Well, now listen, I haven't watched the Cowboys as close as anyone, but you would venture a guess and say, all right, that's sort of your team weaning a young quarterback along, trying to keep the throws safe for him, get him into a rhythm, and allow him to be successful. And as you've started to open up the playbook, again, this is my guess, you see them start to be comfortable pushing the ball downfield with him more. So what's that tell you is that maybe he doesn't have the full complement of the playbook. That's the one thing I've said in all this, is that this depends on how much they've been able to give Dak and how much he's been able to digest so far. Because there's one thing, Tony, he's not going to have the mastery of the playbook that Tony Romo has. There's just no way at this point, based on the length of time of their body of work. So if you believe that Tony Romo coming back in with how well the rest of the team is playing gives you a better full command of everything you want to use, of your full arsenal, because, listen, they're not going to win the rest of their games. At some point, they're going to trip up here, and you know what we're all going to do? We're all going to overreact when Tony Romo's healthy and wonder, because I would venture a guess that Dak Prescott at some point is going to look a little more like a rookie than we've seen so far. And a couple of games ago when they played Philadelphia, he had a bit of that game statistically for him. Now, the rest of the team around him is so good that maybe it won't show up the way Carson Wentz's games like that have had, because he's definitely come back down to rookie status a little bit there. But at some point it's going to show up, and I would bet that we all sort of wildly overreact to that and wonder even more loudly about the Tony Romo situation there in Dallas.
Well, I mean, yes, because there's a storyline, right? I mean, it's easy for us to sink our teeth into that. But he knows enough of the playbook to have won 7 games in a row. The one game that they lost was 1 point. I mean, like, really, he's 1 point away. Well, that would just get you to a tie. But 2 points away, I suppose, from being undefeated this season. Here was Jerry Jones on whether Tony Romo will be available next week.
You had said last week that Romo wouldn't be ready for Cleveland. You made that statement right after the Philly game. Is the door more open for Romo to be at least available for Pittsburgh?
Yes, he's a week better off. He's stronger. He's certainly quicker. All the things that you would expect. Another week and a good week on his part of strengthening and conditioning.
So could he be active against Pittsburgh?
Well, unlike last week, I wouldn't expect it.
I tell Tony Romo to keep his back healthy by working on his posture while he's holding the clipboard on the sideline.
It's a good line. I'll give that to you. That was nice. That was well delivered. Again, you can justify it both ways for me. The beauty, and it was Dan Graziano who wrote that article on .com, so if you get a chance, check it out, because I think it's very good. But his point is basically there's no wrong decision here for the Cowboys because of how they've built this team. Dak has gone out and played very well. This is not taking anything away from him. But Zeke Elliott and that offensive line have been exactly what we thought they were going to be going into this season. It's allowed that Cowboys defense to way outperform what we believe they have talent-wise on that side because of their ball control offense there. And they've got a quarterback that's gone out there and made the plays that he's needed to in that game and looked really good. So I don't know if the rest of that formula all just breaks down if Tony Romo comes back into the game.
This goes back to one of my favorite phrases. Perfect is the enemy of good. And in the search for perfection, oftentimes you don't realize you got it pretty good. Dallas is darn good right now. In trying to get perfect, I think you could maybe lose what's going really well for you at the moment. 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. Mike did not like that last statement from me, but unfortunately, he does not have time to rebut.
You're listening to the First and Last Podcast with Robin Lundberg and Mike Golic Jr.
Now, before the break, you made a face as if what I had just said was rancid and offensive. Basically, just, that the Cowboys situation is good. I wouldn't want to mess with it. Please allow me to hear what was so noteworthily terrible about what I said.
I'm trying to demean my point on the front end. I see what you're doing. And no, listen, I always enjoy your line of perfect is the enemy of good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting the line right?
Yeah, it's not my line, I don't think. It comes from someone. I might as well take credit for it now, but it's an old phrase I just like.
Yeah,
I heard it somewhere.
I've heard you use it enough on this show where I will attribute it to you at this point, right, wrong, or indifferent. And it's a good line. But in this case, I think the idea that what they'd be doing would be in search of perfect, it would just be in search of better. And we're always in search of better in any realm, in any sport.
But better than 7-1, better than essentially almost 8-0, better than how well Prescott. I mean, Prescott is playing. When we talk about the MVP conversation, he's playing at that kind of level now. Where I'm not saying I would vote for him for MVP, but it's not a ridiculous thing to say. It's not a ridiculous thing to say, hey, Dak Prescott's in the MVP conversation. Look at his numbers.
I get that. I mean, at this point, I'm not even sure he's the MVP on his own team.
Well, no, he might not be. But I'm just saying, you can't play much better than he can. I guess the only thing you could ask for is lighting up the scoreboard a little bit more from a touchdown standpoint. But what I like about the way Prescott is playing is he's very they were talking about it last night on the broadcast about Derek Carr and how he helps his offensive line out because he gets the ball out of his hands quickly. He gets them up to the line of scrimmage quickly and all that. And I get the same sense from Prescott. What I would worry about actually putting Romo in there is not only his injury history, but messing up that rhythm. Not that he's not a great player, but he does it in a different way. You always think of Romo like rolling out of the pocket and making those sort of plays. Prescott, it's much more... It seems as if the train is on schedule a little bit more often with Dak Prescott.
And some of that could also be the team around him at this point. That's what I wait and see. And there's no way to measure that. And I hate that this conversation somehow is positioning me against what Dak Prescott has done because that's not the case. We've all been in awe of what he's been able to accomplish as a rookie. It's been sensational. I'm just saying within that building, they know whether or not Tony Romo coming back could still make them better. And we're going to talk about their record, and I've always said, you are what your record says you are. They're a 7-1 football team who could very well be 8-0. That being said, we saw it last year where Carolina won 15 games, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. And you look at the rest of their schedule, they're at Pittsburgh coming up, but that game doesn't look like it did at the beginning of the season right now. And then it's the Ravens, Washington, a struggling Minnesota team, a Giants team who, look out below, is right at second place in the NFC.
And they've already beaten Dallas and Philadelphia, so you have to make sure you keep an eye on the New York Giants for sure.
But that's still late down. So you look, it's not exactly murderer's row left on the rest of their schedule, so maybe they could. My guess would be that they don't go undefeated through the course of the rest of the season. So it's what things start to show up over the course of that time. If you do have a loss, what things start to show up. And then are those areas that you internally, as you're constantly have your people in their self-scouting, are those areas you think could be improved with a veteran quarterback coming back?
You're listening to the First and Last Podcast with Robin Lundberg and Mike Golic Jr.
It'll be a 58-yard try from the near left hash to the goalpost to our left. The snap of Muhlbach, the hold of Sam Martin. Matt Prater with one of the biggest legs in NFL history to tie the game. The snap is back, right-footed, end over end kick. It is good! From 58 yards, it is good at the buzzer. We are tied. We are headed to overtime in Minneapolis.
And in overtime, the Lions beat the Vikings 22-16. It's first and last. Robin Lundberg, Mike Golic Jr. And Mike, it feels like that whole Vikings thing might be done.
Man, what a slide that's been. A real fall from grace from everyone, from lauding, heaping praise on Sam Bradford through the start of the season, and really dumb people saying that this Vikings offense might be better without Adrian Peterson.
Well, I don't know. Is it worse? I mean, the team's not playing as well.
No, and listen, the problems they have really begin and end. I've talked a lot about offensive line this show. They really begin and end with that group up front. It's been an absolute disaster for them. Sam Bradford's been under siege constantly there, and he's a guy we know isn't built to take a lot of punishment back there. Certainly, this group has been tough to watch the last 3 games.
In an NFL season that maybe has been lacking storylines to the point where the Vikings were a big one early in the year, what is the storyline in the NFL right now? Is it the Raiders? Is it the Cowboys? 888-729-3776. Let's go to Mike. Mike, you're up first here on First and Last.
Good morning, man. How are you?
Good, sir.
Real quick, Mike, the offensive line coach for the Pats you were thinking of was Dante Scarnecchia earlier.
Yes, that's the one. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, what I was watching yesterday, I mean, the reason for me for why these TV ratings are down, I mean, what I saw was complete garbage. Just garbage. Just all these penalty flags flying everything. I mean, last night, just the Oakland Raider Denver game alone, Chris Harris Jr. had 3 or 4 flags in succession at the goal line for pass interference. I mean, I felt bad for the guy, and I hate Denver, but come on. I mean, just let them play on some things. I get the pass interference, but you got to let these players play too.
If you want to point to the flags, that's fine. Yesterday, as far as people continuing to lament whatever the overall product has been in the NFL, we got a bunch of entertaining games yesterday, so I won't really entertain much of that conversation. But the flags continue to be an issue. That's something hopefully in the back half of the season now we might see calm down a little bit. I said a lot of times they emphasize the calls they're looking to really harp on at the beginning of the season, the officials in the league. And so maybe that calms down in this back half of the season now that we've gotten more accustomed to how the games are being officiated. I'm not sure. We'll have to see on that one, but it still remains a problem.
I won't plant my flag, I guess pun intended, yesterday and say that was an example of why the product is down or whatnot. But we are, when we do talk about it, talking about all these other factors sometimes and focus a little bit less away from the product. And I do think that has to be one of the factors that plays into it when we're having the big picture conversation on that, which is not exactly what we're having today. Let's go to, how about Justin? Justin, you're up next on First and Last.
Hey, good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hey, I just want to share a quick story before I discuss about the offensive line. Hey, Robin, I know a couple of months ago you had an incident with your son tackling a kid. Well, I had that same incident this weekend. It was pretty funny. I had to scold my son, but I was very proud of him, my wife and I, protecting his daughter, his sister, proper form and everything.
We didn't scold Raj for it.
We acted like we scolded, but then we high-fived him on the side.
There you go.
I'm the only one he's allowed to beat up, though. Like, there's a rule. We had a party for him on Saturday, Justin. He just turned 2. And we have a little game where I get down on my knees, like standing up on my knees, and I go, I will battle you. And as soon as I say that, he runs and tackles me and then just starts punishing me into submission. But I always have to tell him, Daddy's the only one you can do that to. That's it. Go ahead about the offensive line.
My son's 2 years old, so I see the same. Bonding with them. But offensive line, it's been very important. Derek Carr should know from his brother in this time in Houston how bad his brother took a beating and the importance of offensive line. You look at Tennessee Titans as well. They invested a lot of money as well, and they've basically doubled their win total from last year. And I just think the offensive line is really underrated, and it helps your quarterback and your running game, which I think running game has been very, very dominant this year with Ezekiel Elliott, David Johnson, Melvin Gordon as a breakout.
It helps everything, right? I mean, you're trying to push forward. You're trying to move the ball forward. You're trying to protect your quarterback. In every single movie or TV show that's ever dramatized a battle, in a battle that if you have the high ground, if you have some sort of fortress to protect you, it works well. Game of Thrones, the wall, they protect the wall, all that stuff. People are always storming a castle or storming the wall, and you're able to hold it. That's the offensive line. That barrier between your quarterback and the defense and between your running back and the defense and all that stuff. Yes, it's not it's not that fun. It's not that sexy, but it's absolutely pivotal, and you could make the argument that having an excellent offensive line, I think this is an argument you could make, is more important than having a good quarterback.
I still don't know if I'd go that far, but you won't get anyone who will be more comfortable stating the importance of an offensive line than me, so I certainly agree with the sentiment because he's right. If you look around the league at teams that tend to do well or that have made improvements, the Atlanta Falcons jump out at me. They add Alex Mack, who I think is the best center in the NFL. That helps shore up a lot of things for them. We've talked about the Cowboys. We've talked about the Raiders. You look at the Seahawks and when they run into trouble, and it's usually for them the interior of the line. Now, they've been a little better at the center spot, which is usually so pivotal for them, and at tackle they're struggling now. So that's also kind of how they do business there. They make a lot of guys who are converted D linemen into linemen. They do a lot of that different stuff, but shoring up that group up front, more often than not, the Chargers are the poster child for that too, the success they've had this year when really Phillip Rivers has had a changing group of faces in front of him for the last 2 or 3 seasons because of how many injuries they've suffered up front. So now you solidify that. You've got a few more guys that stay healthy along that front consistently through the season, and lo and behold, the Chargers actually start playing a little bit better. Now, they're still 4-5, but they're 3-1 at home. They've looked like a different football team this year, and a lot of this stuff can trace back to the O-line more often than not.
Let's go to Bobby. Bobby, you're on first and last. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, my comment is just trying. I'm not a statistical guru when it comes to the NFL or anything like that, but I'm just trying to figure out what great accomplishments that Tony Romo has done that would say, yeah, he's done this before, so we need to put him back in there so he can get us to that promised land again, because I can't remember an NFC championship or a Super Bowl win that he's ever had.
Well, he hasn't had those. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he's not good.
Yeah, if you're looking for what to point to, the answer is 2014.
You're listening to the First and Last Podcast with Robin Lundberg and Mike Golic Jr.
He takes the snap. He's back to throw. Steps up. Fires it high over the middle. Intercepted. Once again, Andrew Adams, the rookie free agent with his first career pick. And he's chased out of bounds at the Philadelphia 30.
It's First and Last. Robin Lundberg, Mike Golic Jr. and shh. But the New York Giants, they're around. They're relevant. They're 5-3, having beaten the Eagles, who fall to 4-4. It feels like the Eagles and the Vikings, their cute little stories may be over with. And the Giants at 5-3 are really live, I think, not just because some of the names on that team, Mike, but because of their record and the wins that they have being over 2 division teams, especially the one in hand against Dallas. So if they were able to beat Dallas again, head-to-head, they're only 1 game behind in the standings if they can do that.
And it's been a nice 3-game streak for them now after a 3-game slide right before that against the Packers, the Vikings, and Washington. So the turnaround's been there, and we've seen a lot more of what we've expected. That offense, we knew the 3-headed monster we had talked about with them at receiver there producing, but the defense stepping up. That was the point of contention going into this year. They threw a ton of money at it this offseason, and there's been growing pains to start the season. There's no other way to put it. Anytime you bring in a bunch of new guys into that team and start to expect them to gel right away, we might have jumped on that a bit too early, but it's starting to level out, and what you've got in the end now is much more talent on your defense that's starting to learn to play together better, and it showed up yesterday in the time when it mattered the most down in the end of that game when Philly had a chance to pull ahead on that final drive down in the red zone. The New York Giants dialed up heat on every single play, and they were managing to get back there to disrupt Carson Wentz and make sure that he wasn't going to have a chance to set his feet and make a throw. And you give them all the credit in the world for being able to bow up 3 or 4 times in a row down there to end that game and give the Giants a win.
Christopher Tyler tweets in, run-heavy teams in this passing league, Dallas, Oakland, Miami, # first and last. And I think there might be something to that. In most sports, the trends, at least the team sports, the trends have gone towards spreading things out. And it's common sense, right? You are getting your best players in basketball the ball in space. Same thing in football. You're getting your best players the ball in space. You're trying to use the most square footage is the way I like to put it, because the end line to end line or end zone to end zone, the dimensions remain the same. Soccer, the same philosophies apply. Basically, all those sports are cousins. Hockey, whatever. You want that space to work for you. And NFL teams are right to have gone to more spread offenses, to pass the ball more. It can be more effective. You can pick up yardage in bigger chunks, all that sort of stuff. It's efficiency. At the same time, when you spread out that far, you do leave a little bit of a hole. You leave some gaps there. And these teams that are now maybe throwing the punches to the body are having some success, and Dallas and Oakland seem like really good examples of that, because maybe you're exposed a little bit when you're that spread out, and they can take advantage of it.
You are, and being spread out doesn't mean that you abandon the run. You even look in college where this all sort of germinated from, and the teams that were the best version of spread teams in college, Oregon really was the poster child of this for so long, still were able to control the ball and run it really effectively. It's all built off your ability to run it against weak box looks where you get good counts inside of the box, and that doesn't change in the NFL. Now, the spread mechanics are way different in the NFL. It's more formation than the actual operation of how things go, but you still rely on the group up front to get things done. The Patriots last year are really the perfect example of that, because as much as Tom Brady and that group want to spread it around, throw it around the yard, we've seen they've been at their best when they've got a power run option, but also when they were so deficient at that line last year, it didn't matter how much talent. It didn't matter Gronk, Edelman, Brady. When it came down to really the time where it mattered the most in their schedule in the playoffs, they weren't able to hold up because of that.
Well, yeah, I guess I can articulate it a little bit better, too. I'm talking also about the defenses adapting to the offenses. So the defenses are used to these attacks where they have to worry about being spread out, and that's what's leaving them more vulnerable, because they're trying to adapt to the way the offenses are attacking. When you hit them with a little bit of the old school, or like I guess, like I said, the body punches, it's a little bit tougher for them to adjust because they're so worried about adjusting to the passing game.
Well, and think about, and you've seen a change on both sides of the ball for how groups are built now. Offensive lines, a lot of whom are going to more zone looks to combat some of the more complex defenses you've seen. The bodies have gotten smaller. The tackle position has gotten a bit smaller across the board to accommodate some of that. And on defense now, we've seen that especially at the linebacker spot, that breed of hybrid safety that everyone's becoming really accustomed to, who can essentially be another linebacker and cover for you and give you that option, has created differently. So now all of a sudden, maybe if you start lining guys up again and going right at them, you don't have linebackers that are going to be your traditional button shed guys as much anymore as it used to be. So there's always that tipping point that you get to on either side. And I've always said none of that really, you can window dress it however you want. You're still going to win and lose games up front however you've built your team, and having quality guys in those spots matters. And in an NFL where it's so difficult to keep those guys because of the way the CBA is set up, because of contracts now and free agency, it's difficult to keep those units together for long periods of time. So when you're able to do that, and with the quality guys that these teams we're talking about have locked down, you get this result.
Well, that's why Raiders quarterback Derek Carr and we are talking about offensive lines today.
They're the best. They're the best. They should all be in the Pro Bowl. I'm tired of hearing about other O-lines, man. Those guys are the best.
As you pointed out, perhaps a little bit of a sly shot without naming names, a subliminal shot at the Dallas Cowboys, though it's not exactly like I hear offensive line talk 24/7 all the time, 365. The Dallas Cowboys and the Oakland Raiders, are they the stories of the NFL right now? 888-729-3776. You're just excited because somebody is mentioning the offensive line, period.
Man, this is great. You know what? Let's keep it going. You want storylines? Let's start a Raiders-Cowboys O-line beef right there.
Yeah.
Goes so counter to the nature of the position, but I'm all for it. Let's keep them in the headlines, fellas. Keep this rolling.
Who's your favorite right guard? 888-SAY-ESPN. Let's see how well that works out.
Let's go for it. I mean, I venture to guess that the only right guard that most people can name is the one on the Cowboys, and that's Zach Martin, who...
I was thinking of the deodorant. That's about as far as I got. Yeah.
Hey, listen, that works too. They're both very great at protecting you. You can count on all-day dryness in the pocket with either of those guys.
Yeah, I'm keeping my arms down right now because we do an early show and can't always get to deodorant at this time of the day.
Wait, what?
I don't even wear deodorant most of the time. It makes my armpits sweat, so I go McConaughey style without deodorant much of the time.
Well, everyone who's going to be around Robin for the rest of the day, enjoy that one. Keith, I am so very sorry for what you now I know have to put up with every morning, which is a stinky host in the studio.
I maintain the hygiene part of it. I mean, I'm clean. It's not like I don't want to smell. I have to do the check. I have to do the Molly Shannon's character from Saturday Night Live, the under armpit self-sniff a little bit.
You're disgusting.
Old people smell.
You're listening to the First and Last Podcast with Robin Lundberg and Mike Golic Jr.